All right, so this speech goes out to Latin because there's always very few in English terms. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Access to university is a privilege that reinforces stereotypes, puts down those who have less, and is a lie about the perception of success. I'm going to do three things in my speech. I'm going to do the model and the framing. I'm going to explain to you why universities are unjust in the way that they operate. And I'm going to explain to you why there's changes in narratives. And fourthly, I'm going to explain to you how I'm going to deal with opposition's case. Firstly, in terms of the model, this is probably going to look about like 60 to 70% of the workforce is going to be unemployed people, but that still means that, for example, the CEO is probably still going to be the CEO and that has preparation. It's just probably going to be like some managers in terms of all of the hierarchical structure, but that means that there's still going to be a counterbalance between in the higher ups, people that do have a university degree and not, so that there can still be good leadership and they can still be like teaching about the things in the more speciality things about that they need to know about in the job. First of all, why is this the access to university is a privilege? We think that most people's lives is dictated by the type of education that they have had and the capacity that they have received throughout their life. We think that it is significantly hard for individuals to access universities. First of all, in some countries, it is really hard to access public universities whenever there's only a couple of slots left. And that means that, for example, people that didn't have like the people that had to work whenever they were in high school, or people that just didn't have enough preparation because they had to take care of their brothers and sisters, means that it is significantly hard to enter public universities whenever there's a limited amount of slots. But secondly, because private ones are significantly expensive, right? Even if you do get some money from the state or from scholarships, it is significantly expensive, and you have to keep up good GPAs, which just means there's a lot of dropouts that just significantly happen. But third of all, because the process of entering in and of itself is racist and discriminatory. Look at, for example, minorities and racial discriminations about who gets in and who doesn't get in. Look at the privileged backgrounds and the legacies and people that before, because they also graduated from that university, is significantly easier to get into the university. This means that it is just on a systematic level unfair to access to universities. And we think that it is valued arbitrarily that university degree means more preparation in society than other things, right? And we think that this is systematically bad because it is just arbitrarily. You could go to a great university, but just pass the courses because you had friends that cheated on you, and it doesn't mean that you have more preparation than someone that didn't go to a university, or etc. Why is this true? Because first, you can do other stuff, for example, like Coursera, where you can take more courses and therefore learn about these things. You can go to public libraries and absorb more information that could also make you like understand about the things that you want to do. You can do, for example, like selling techniques, like for example, like sellers on the street that, for example, had 5, 10 years that they sell a lot of stuff. This probably means that they have more capacity to interact with people on a day-to-day basis and sell stuff than someone that just like knows the techniques and someone that just knows the theory that did go to the university. Notice that, or for example, having mentors, or for example, self-learning, most of these things and scenarios aren't taken into account whenever you're applying into a job and whenever you're getting hired, because more likely than not, people are only seeing the paper, the paper into which university you graduated, and therefore they're esteeming what is more important or not. We think that this, therefore, A, in principle, we think that this is justified, or B, we think this changes narratives in society that this is really important. This is what really important for various things. Because first, people without degrees are probably valued less in society than people that have degrees. We think this is really important, right? Because their self-esteem really depends on that, but the capacity and the jobs that they can actually access also depends on this, right? This means, for example, they're only getting hired in the most medium, in the most lower tier jobs because they don't have an access to a university degree, and we think that this is completely terrible, right? We think this changes significantly narratives in society, but now there's incentives for individuals to want to acquire other skills outside of university, because now in the status quo, most individuals just resign to not having a university degree and just going to the low tier jobs instead of actually wanting to do something else because they know society won't value it. But B, it actually makes their self-esteem and the people around them significantly better. Now, other people aren't just blaming them and telling them that they're significantly bad or terrible. Now they're probably going to be more motivated to actually want to do other things like Coursera, like public libraries, like everything I told you, because now self-learning is probably going to be taken into account significantly into what level of the company or organization you're actually going to access, into what other courses you're actually also going to be taking. We think this is significantly important. But third of all, we give access to other forms of studying and preparation that we think are just going to be significantly important. Why is this then the most important thing in this debate? Because notice that there's a booming society right now that most jobs don't require high degrees of technicism. This is important, right? For example, like media managers, or for example, like public advisors or counselors don't need that much technicism within going into university or stuff like that, which means that, for example, instead of going to university and getting a marketing degree so just you can manage some online accounts, right? This means that now you can do that without it, but it also means that, for example, things like selling or techniques is probably going to be significantly better, and you can also apply all of these things. But more likely than not, other people within the company can also give you mentorships and can also give you guidance into what is the more technical stuff that you do need in the company, and therefore that means that you can also achieve this level of technicism in my side of the house. Before I continue, if CEO has a point. 3, 2, 1. Oh,
yeah, if these people are so well prepared, if these people are so capable of being well prepared, why aren't they just already hired? We're not saying that there needs to be a requirement that everyone has to have a college degree.
No. I think I showed you with my characterization why this is false. There is very few incentives for these people to actually get this preparation, because notice that it is not valued as highly as having a university degree, and that means that experiences, mentorship, self-learnership is not valued as much as stuff as a university, and therefore we think that this means that individuals think that they have to get a university degree in order to do so, and because it is significantly unfair and unjust, they don't do it, and they just resign themselves to the worst medium outcome of jobs. We think we dealt with this already. How are we going to deal with opposition case first? First, if opposition wants to claim that less people are going to be prepared, we think that it is valued other forms of preparation in society. So now we do have incentives for individuals to want to do other preparations and not just resign themselves. But B, if they think that this is unfair for people that do have a degree and are not competing, notice and weigh the unfairness panel. The unfairness of having to resign to a life in and of itself of mediocre jobs and of terrible things, and of having people being consistently thrown at you because of arbitrary status of what a university means and arbitrary status of where you were born. We think that this is completely unfair, and we think that people that do have a degree more likely than not come from a more economic background, and therefore that means they have more capacities to get a job, but that also means that they also have capacities to compete for the other 30 to 40% jobs that they can get. So this also means that we also incentivize them to have more extra skills, to have more things, and that just means that, for example, on the workplace and the companies, they're not going to be affected that much. At the end of the day, these people are going to be more happy. These are the most important actions in the debate. Very proud to propose.
Fantastic. We thank the Prime Minister for their very fine speech. Now call upon the Leader of Opposition to open the case for opening opposition. Hear, hear.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, let me just clear this desk. It's kind of heavy.
Also, just briefly confirming before you begin, do you consent to recording?
Sure. OG came up and told you why the status quo is super inequitable, but he failed to tell you why the government proposal would actually make things any better. In the opposition speech, we're going to tell you why this model, where we require all employees to take on individuals without college degrees on all levels of their organization, would actually make the world substantially less fair and less equitable overall. So 2 main arguments in the speech: one on efficiency and the inherent value of education, and second on this principal idea of equity and fairness. So first on education, right? We think that higher education is still very valuable for jobs for 5 reasons, right? Firstly, it allows you to highly specialize in something to a degree that high school degrees or just random courses on Coursera cannot actually do, right? It compiles a list, it grades you, and it gives you more incentive to actually do it, right? Moreover, it gives you a more fair more fair third-party monitor of whether you cheated or not. Because in the current society, there's ChatGPT and everything. And yes, you can cheat in colleges too, but relatively speaking, there are still professors, there are still like Turnitin, there's still like checks on whether people are cheating or not. So we tell you that it is still a more fair monitor of those and a more fair test of the specialization in like computer science and all of those really unique skills, right? Second of all, we think colleges just generally filters people out via graduation rate. Yes, it is skewed, but there is still some valuation of your work ethic. And if you can't reach a minimal bar, no matter how rich you are, you really can't graduate those schools, right? And third of all, we think it helps you build network. We think a lot of times you're networking with people in your major, you're going to organizations and clubs, and those really help you build your network, which is an essential skill that is not achievable just by self-learning, right? It is something that is essential to the workplace. We think that colleges prepare you better. Fourth of all, we just think college gives you a lot of hard skills. For example, like coding, stats, all those skills could be really useful towards the jobs, right? Fifth of all, we think college gives you communication skills that you can't get elsewhere. For example, when you're writing, when you're presenting to professors, all of those create communication skills, right? When you're talking and going to office hours in your professors, you're talking essentially with a higher up and you're practicing your skills. You're practicing how you can communicate with classmates, communicate in group projects, and communicate with your professors overall, right? We tell you that all of those skills are something that is not obtainable when you just shut yourself off to online learning on some course, right? So even though OO told you that like a lot of times the skills that you could learn, you can also obtain from elsewhere, we tell you that colleges are still a more effective and holistic and just metric of those skills, right? What we mean over here is that essentially colleges will still be better at actually judging those skills. Why is that true, right? We think that essentially what happens is that when companies don't hire from colleges, or like they don't hire this as a basic metric, they're going to hire more unfit people because colleges are a more just metric of those skills. Why is that true? 4 reasons. So firstly, the average pool will just be worse and less filtered, right? Second of all, we think that there's no standardized measure of those skills. Colleges are still a big institution. They have reputations to actually keep in check, and they have a lot of boards and organizations under them to actually make sure people don't cheat, right? Yes, it is not foolproof, but at least it is better than the alternative, which is online courses where you could literally just hire someone else to take, right? We tell you that essentially college is still better off in a relatively flawed world. Third of all, we think that other measures are just inherently more easy to manipulate, right? For example, other metrics of the job application process are like interviews, resumes, cover letters. Note that resumes and cover letters could essentially be all like written by someone else, hired by someone else. You actually don't have to do any of those things. You could literally just lie on your resume, right? Like it's pretty fucking prevalent. I don't think there's much of a check on that. And also generally it's just more subjective than GPAs, right? Like there's no actual standardized measure. And fourth of all, we think that this policy would actually devalue higher education and cause a cultural and mindset shift overall, right? Where people just kind of de-emphasize education. They think that it's not necessary, it's not important. Essentially, this policy sends a message that you don't have to have those hard skills necessarily. And we tell you that society overall is going to get less training. So what are the impacts of this, right? Firstly, we're going to tell you that companies are going to lose efficiency because you have less fit and productive workers. Your worker force is less filtered, essentially. And what happens is that this will decrease the revenue and earning potential of those companies, meaning that they cannot hire as many people as before, or they might even have to fire some people just to keep up their like less productive workers, right? So who is the real people who are actually going to be fired in this situation? We tell you that it's not going to be the rich kids with connections, because they have connections with like the business partners, the managers, or even if it's just a middle-class kid with some connection to like a manager, they're still better off than a poor kid with nothing but an education with a college degree, right? We tell you the lower class kids, the lower class workers are going to be the first people who are going to be fired. Second of all, we tell you that on a macro level, the economy is just going to become worse, right? When you have higher unemployment and less revenue in those companies, essentially essentially consumer spending decreases, right? And what this does is that it puts the economy in a negative cycle where when they spend less, companies essentially earn even less, and then there's less investment overall, right? We tell you that this puts them in a completely negative cycle, and the economy overall is likely to be compromised or like experience stagnation overall, right? We tell that what is going to happen over here, and that there's going to be higher unemployment, meaning that the lower class are going to be the most directly affected, right? We tell you when companies cut people first, historically and empirically, the people who are most affected, the people who are first fired, are the lower class. The rich gets bailed out even if they get fired. The poor, when they get fired, they literally have nothing. They become homeless, right? Or they don't have a safety net overall. We tell you that the people who are going to be harmed here are twofold. Firstly, it's going to be people with a college degree who's going to be sacrificed with compared to the people without an education, right? But second of all, we tell you that just more people are going to be fired, more people are going to be unemployed in the government world. Now, quickly on this principal point, right? We tell you that yes, the status quo is not perfect. Yes, it's not perfectly equitable and fair, but on the government side, it's going to be even substantially less fair, right? We tell you that the people who are going to be sacrificed are the lower class people who worked really hard for an education degree, who are in debt now, and they're going to be fired, right? Know that a lot of times this is irreversible because people already under the false notion got a college degree and are under extreme debt, right? We tell you that what happens is that those people will be compromised, and people who worked relatively less hard with less like intelligence or whatever is going to be the ones who are going to put in place to replace them, right? Basic principle is fairness. So proud to oppose.
Great. We thank the Leader of Opposition for their very fine speech and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for opening government. Just to confirm, DPM still fine with recording?
Yeah, all good. Give me 1 second and I'll start. Right? Same PIs on chat. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. There are two questions that arise from opening opposition's speech. First, who is the most important actor? I explained to you that the most important actor were the people that didn't have university degrees, that were literally being shamed from life, and that had the worst types of jobs, and therefore getting them to any better type of job will be significantly better. Opening opposition is trying to tell you the most important actors are the people that are already within the job and the people that are going to get fired, and this is going to cause unemployment. And the second thing that I'm going to solve is will the capacity to lie and the capacity for these individuals to lie on Coursera or whatever be any impactful on the job by itself, and how this is going to work. First thing, who is the most important actor? First of all, notice that these actors that they tell you already have all of the things that they're trying to tell you about a university. They have the networks, they have the communication skills, they have the highly specialization that they're trying to tell you, which we think is significantly, if they want to have success in life or they want to get a job, probably makes it significantly much more easier than having it from someone that never, in their words, had any of that, right? Which we think, therefore, that the actors who didn't have university degree and who just had other medium jobs are probably going to be much better on the outcome in my side of the world than theirs, because they never look at the comparative. In their side of the world, those actors are still going to be suffering from doing, for example, the really low-end jobs, for example, like being in a factory 24/7, or for example, doing the plumbing that nobody else wants to do, like just jobs that just go out of the dignity in life and the people that they have. And we therefore think that these actors are going to be significantly more important, and then they're going to be significantly better. But secondly, more likely than not, if we're just firing people, these people that we're firing already have experience from a company that also that also employ them, which just means it is significantly much more easier for these individuals to get more jobs, easier for these individuals, like I said, to acquire more skills because they also had like a degree of money from being in the company, and therefore like compete for the other 30-40% on the company, which we just think makes it significantly easier for these people rather than the individuals who just have no chance in competing at all in the status quo. We think this leads to, therefore, that the most important actor in this debate is not the actor that's getting fired, but the actor that just has no ability ability to compete in the status quo in the status. Secondly, will the capacity to lie will be important for the jobs? Opening up position tries to play with this claim that this is going to lead to an unemployment rate that is going to be significantly higher. First of all, this doesn't deal with the model that we already explained to you, that there's probably going to be mentors, that the CEOs are probably going to be people that do have a university degree, a master's and a PhD, and they're probably going to lead them with the required things that they have. But secondly, it doesn't lead with the fact that we explained to you that the ability to have experiences in and of itself is the same thing without a university degree. Communication skills, you can have that when you're selling things to people in the streets because you literally need the money for food, and therefore you acquire communication skills that are really, really good, right? The ability to have networking could also imply like the people that had, for example, like friends and etc. to sell and other type of things could also be acquired without that, right? We just think that the only thing the university gives you is a specialization, which you can also acquire by going to public libraries and reading, for example, physics books, etc. in terms of how you're going to do it, or just watching YouTube videos. We think that this isn't valued in society by itself. We think it is only valued in what university you go to, and therefore there's a disincentive for people to actually want to acquire the knowledge because they know no one is going to hire them over someone that may have the same information as them but just does have a degree. But the second thing, we think that there's a capacity to lie is not that important, right? We explained to you in the model that there's incentives for individuals to go much more higher up in the ranks if they have other degrees and other skills that they do, right? And I think that's important, right? Because if some individuals just have zero skills absolutely and whatever, they're probably going to go to the lower end of the job or the factory, right? Which they would have gone either way. So it's the same in their side of the world. But if they do acquire more skills, if they do show that they have communication, if the CEOs or the leaders do know that they probably are good with the customers and they're good at selling, they're probably going to go up higher in the rank, right? And that's just more incentives for these individuals to acquire more skills and therefore be significantly better. So no, we don't think that is important. We think that these individuals have incentives now to do better. And we think it is not just online learning. We think it is the experiences of the life that now the narratives about that changes, right? It is not just that they're not that important, but now that they are more important than just having a university degree. And we think that is significantly better. In terms of why is this the most important thing? First, the well-being of people without a university degree increases dramatically. If in the other side, they could have never obtained a job and therefore had to live in the streets, now they can get a job because now they're having to be hired. But even in the worst cases, they're hired in the bottom tier jobs, right? But now there's incentives for them to go up continuously if they can show that they have more skills and more if they have more skills in their life, and that just means that they can get more jobs. But that just means that the other things that influence their life can make them have better jobs. Secondly, in terms of the social stigma, right? They never explain to you in opening opposition how the social stigma changes, and we think that is really important for individuals and the capacity for them to feel that they're successful, the capacity for them to feel as a human being and not something worse than that just because of their life and the arbitrary things of them. And we think that therefore the friends and the family that are going to be around them are going to support them more. They're going to give them more abilities and more things, and we just think that is significantly better. But third of all, their own stigma of feeling less like a failure within life and just submitting themselves to low-end tiers, but now actually having more motivation to actually want to do so. We think that is significantly important in this debate. These individuals, these actors are the most important. We significantly win them over opening opposition. If CEO has a point, I'll take them now.
Yeah, I mean, like getting into like these like large scale, like specialized industries does not require you just reading a physics textbook. It requires access to equipment. It means access to laboratories. It means access to experts to help you. How do you get that on your side of the house?
Universities don't stop existing. And we think that if they is so important in certain specialized sectors, then there's still going to be people that want to do this. But let's actually flip this argument. Notice that if we devalue higher education, as opening opposition wants to tell you, notice that there's probably going to be a creation of other forms of learning, and there's going to be a market that is actually more available and readily for other people to want to access, because now this is actually something important that people want to do. Other specialists that actually want to teach this physics techniques that the Victor wants to say. But see, notice that this actually means that there's probably going to be less expensive universities, because this actually means that universities in and of itself charge you so much because they know that this is the only available method that you need to get in, and therefore they charge you thousands and thousands of dollars when they shouldn't and they can't. But this means that now universities has to be more competitive with these other forms of learning, and that means that there's going to be less expensive. Overall, if you need it for certain techniques and for certain sectors, there's still going to be available like engineers and technicians, etc. But we still think that in most techniques, this is going to be much better for individuals that don't have these things, and that they're going to significantly improve their lives. We think that a business sector is not as important as the life of an individual that is suffering. Very proud to propose.
Great. We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their very fine speech and call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to conclude the top half of this debate. And Diola, do you consent to recording?
Yeah, I do. Give me 1 second. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A few things I'm going to do in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to flip the link into equity, basically saying that our side is probably more equitable and is going to help the most vulnerable actors. Secondly, I'm going to tell you how even if you don't buy that and how more people might get hired in government world, why we don't prefer that and how we're still probably linking into the most vulnerable actor, then I'm going to do all the weighing. Firstly, on flipping the link for equity to our side, a few things to prove before we can access this point. 1, hiring without a college degree, particularly for new hires, is very arbitrary. There are 2 reasons as to why this is the case. 1, there's a lack of quantification. Marilyn already told you that when you don't have access to GPA or college ranking statistics, you probably don't have as much information as to who you want to hire. But secondly, you just have less information in general, such as filters. That's to say you probably don't know whether they got accepted into college, whether they were able to graduate with certain XY degree that might be harder than another. Given that recruiters are given incentives to hire the best people, they need to remedy for this dissonance between not having enough information and still wanting to make the best hire, at least in their mind. The second premise then is that arbitrariness favors the rich. There are 2 reasons as to why this is the case. 1, it is critically going to be based on connections, i.e., do you have a referral? Because insofar as recruiters have the incentive to better either their own job prospects or link it to hiring the best person ever, the lowest risk person to hire isn't going to be the poor, uneducated person who's hiring without a college degree. It's probably going to be your boss's son, who either, even if they don't work out, probably gets you in good with your boss. Secondly, here, you probably just have more access to early job experience, which is what they're going to evaluate if you are a rich and uneducated person. That's to say that if you're rich and uneducated, you probably attend a better high school who can help you network and get access to more internships, or you just have more connections through patronage networks that gets you access to working at like a law firm when you're 15 or 16 versus the comparative world where people aren't able to access that if you're poor and uneducated. Given that, the third premise here, and this is so simple, rich people will probably still be applying for the jobs through the government program. That's to say it's not just going to be poor people who are uneducated without a college degree. There are probably going to be rich people without a college degree. 2 reasons to why this is the case. 1, either they just don't go to college because I don't know, they weren't like motivated when they were 18, 19, 20, whatever. Or 2, they literally now seeing these programs and now that they have access to these programs decide I don't need to go to fucking college. I have connections. My dad can just get me fucking hired. So I'm just going to like skip college and as such apply for these programs. The implication is extraordinarily simple and takes out everything opening government said. In both worlds, rich people will be applying and they're inherently advantaged the more arbitrary a hiring process is. So they're going to get these jobs. That already symmetricizes everything opening government tells you, because I don't know why we inherently care about this vulnerable actor of a rich person who is uneducated and didn't get a college degree because 1, they either weren't motivated to get it, or 2, they just opted out not to get it now that they see that these programs exist. We're going to take this 1 step further and complete the flip. Why is the comparative far more equitable? When rich unqualified people don't get the job, which is what the government world is pushing away, we think comparatively your average college student does, or recruiters are able to operate in better ways to hire just the best person on average, and that's going to be a more equitable decision. Few premises here. 1, I think it's far less arbitrary, so recruiters look less to referrals and more to statistics. That's to say that their incentives are to hire the best person or to move their job prospects forward. Insofar as hiring the best person possible, whether they're poor or rich, i.e. like getting like a 4.0 GPA in college, they're going to want to do that because that's going to make them look like a better recruiter. And then the next thing here is that the average college student is probably more vulnerable than the people getting the job job in the comparative government world. This is going to prove that college is at least somewhat accessible. That means that we're going to access more equity on our side of the house. 4 reasons to why this is the case. 1, there's a rise of financial aid systems that insofar as people have been understanding the value of education, voters have been pushing governments to create things like FAFSA to make it more accessible for people to access. 2, there's a rise of local and community colleges that often feed into high-level university degrees. Notably, 2 things. Across the world, these local and community colleges, 1, probably accept almost everybody, and 2, have feeder programs into bigger universities. So almost everybody, if they're dedicated enough and if they put in the time, can more than likely access a full university degree. Thirdly, there are probably scholarships to help the poor people who are unconnected but are highly meritocratic. That's to say there are probably charitable organizations such as Koch scholars or things like that that are going to fund people to go to college. Fourthly, there's going to be more liberalization within colleges, which, like, I don't know if I need to prove that, but like most admissions officers are like relatively liberal. It's probably the case that they're going to like look for people who are disadvantaged, who are going to read essays, and as such going to like be moved by interesting stories of people who have suffered. At that point, it's probably very notable that there's a dynamic change in the status quo, that college is just getting more accessible. I think it's very clear. Rich people are probably advantaged in both worlds, but the more arbitrary the process is, 1, the easier it is to get away with nepotism, and 2, the more the incentive is for the recruiter to not hire the best person possible, because they don't know the best person possible. The information is super hard to get when it's very arbitrary, so then they have the higher incentive to just turn to nepotism. The implication is we help the most vulnerable people in our side of the house. We get them hired. We win on OG's own metric, take them cleanly out of this round. In and of itself, this is sufficient to win a debate if the debate is on the metric of the most vulnerable actor. Probably closing will need to outweigh this too. Okay, but even if you buy that more low-income people get a job, Maryland's case outweighs this. Notably, this is us taking opening government at their very best. What did Maryland prove? A few things. That 1, college is a very important skill. She gave you 3 reasons here. 1, it gives you skills. Okay, opening government pushback said you could self-learn on Coursera. Here's why self-learning is hard and probably not going to be the best way possible. 1, it's reliant on you understanding everything yourself. Even if you're a fucking genius, the person who probably has experts, professors who are walking them through every step of the way, understanding complex situations, they're probably going to be inherently better at solving problems or better in the field that they're in. Secondly, it gets you more networks. That's to say you literally have 4 years with people within the industry that you're working for. So you, as a person who has a college degree, probably can get better deals for your company. You can probably get, you probably just can ask people for more advice, things like that. And thirdly, that there's filters such as acceptance rate and GPA that signify that you're probably pretty good. The impact that Maryland proves is that companies have less money if their workers are less efficient. There are 2 things that are going to happen. 1, they're going to fire low-end jobs if companies have less money. 2 reasons this is the case. 1, these low-end jobs probably have less political capital than these higher-end jobs, so they're probably going to be the first ones cut. But secondly, they're viewed as expendable. The weighing is extraordinarily simple. On scale, you probably are losing 5 factory jobs for every 1 vulnerable person you hire, even at their worst. Insofar as the vulnerability is symmetric, we're winning on scale there. We already symmetricized everything on equity. So proud to take this debate from opening opposition.
Great. We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for their very fine speech and thank all speakers of the top half for an excellent round thus far. We'll turn to the Member of Government to open the case for closing government. Hear, hear. And do you consent to streaming / recording? Sorry, I can't hear you. Would you mind unmuting, perhaps? I think might be the issue.
I consent to streaming.
Perfect.
Can I borrow your phone? Okay. Two things in the speech. First, explaining and addressing the quality of education of non-college education, and secondly, why this improves the quality of education of people within colleges themselves. So in terms of addressing the quality of education from non-college means, we get several pushes from OO. They tell us that college is great because it's highly specialized and it actually allows you to quantify how good someone is in a field. We would contest that you actually have high specializations in most in most college graduates, because like a lot of the times when you are learning in an undergrad degree, you learn extremely general stuff that can be learned anywhere, like not just in college, and that specialization mostly happens in grad school. Secondly, in terms of quantification, the only metric they actually give you is GPA, and we would note that GPA is actually not that good of a metric to measure how good someone is at a certain field, because this varies very much across many different university degrees. So a university degree could have really like poorly structured courses that are maybe higher to pass or easier to pass, and all its graduates would have extremely high GPAs. A university could have tougher courses that are maybe like, harder to pass, and so all of its graduates have lower GPAs. So it actually contests that university, like that job people, like job interviewers, actually have a way of quantifying how good someone is based on the metrics that college provides. What I would tell you is that in response to their push on like specialization and you having no way to quantify, we would say that there are incredibly accurate ways of telling whether someone is good at a field in the absence of college. For example, in computer science, where it's very, very regular for you to hire a non-college applicant or someone who doesn't have a university degree, they usually just do coding interviews, which is test how competent you are in technical skills such as algorithms and how good you are at those things. And so we think that there are actual ways that have been developed by certain fields to test for non-college applicants and to test for how proficient people are at these skills. And we just think that those things are actually a better way of telling whether someone is good at that field, whether that someone is a competent computer science, because algorithms is quite like good and important in that field. And if you can access that without college, which you would think you could in most instances, including in the instances that CEO would want to push, then they can test for those things and you can get really good people graduating. So in terms of why this improves the quality of education of people within colleges, now that we've actually told you that the quality won't be such a degrade when you applying without a college degree, we just think that colleges in the status quo are incredibly bad. And what OG tells you on this is that they're really expensive and inaccessible. But I would say that this is maybe slightly uncharitable because there are a range of unis that could cost that could have varying costs. And we think that the thing that is actually most bad about them in the status quo is their quality. The first thing is just to say that they have nothing to compete against. And the reason why this is true is because other universities don't actually provide sufficient competition for a university to improve the quality of its services. And why is this? Because just majority of people don't have a choice in the university they go to. They're limited by factors such as where they're located and the amount of money they have. And so most of the times they have one choice for university because of where they're situated and the amount of money that people have. And so we just think that because the jobs in the status quo have an over-reliance on colleges as a metric. For example, in most jobs, you actually do need a university degree to enter that job field. That means that you basically have a tyranny of colleges like doing whatever they want. They can provide whatever services they have without actually ensuring and guaranteeing quality to the people who attend it, because they have no other option. They cannot travel so far to go to another college because they just don't have the money. Maybe they don't have the time. Maybe they have to take care of their family, as everyone has been saying in this debate. And in those instances, these people are forced to attend these really bad colleges that have really poor provision of services, and it's at their detriment. What are the incentives for colleges to provide bad services? I think there's just one big one, and it's just that it cuts costs in a very big way. For example, you can just pay your professors a bit less, and that increases the margin you make as a college, and that really is it's one of like the biggest drivers in the status quo. Secondly, you can just hire less professors and you're able to have bigger classes, and that does limit the amount of that limits the amount of retention and the amount of like value people draw from those classes. Secondly, we just think that you can recycle materials, which is incredibly like is incredibly normalized right now, and we think that that's usually bad because there's many fields that update quite regularly, and you actually need new materials every single semester to keep in track with those updates that the fields is making. And so we just think that a lot of the times people are getting education that's out of date, education from professors who are not inspired because they're not getting paid enough, and they're just really struggling within that context, and they're also in extremely large classrooms that are not providing them much value. And so we think think that what this policy does, it forces universities to consider the value that education provides to the work sector, because we just think that this actually changes the calculus that high school graduates make in the process of going to university. And that's the most important thing in this debate, because they're now no longer thinking, hey, I have to like go to this college and spend this much money in order to get a degree and maybe be employable, because they're instead thinking, is this degree actually worth the money that I'm going to spend on it if I can get that same job while learning these skills outside of that college context? And so we think that because every single high school, college, or high school graduate is actually making this calculus in their head and has that money associated with it, we think that the colleges, in order to retain the amount of students they get, in order to actually continue to exist, because they want people coming to their colleges and things like that, they have to attract these people and give value for that knowledge. Actually, we'll take that POI from OO.
All right, in the vast majority of industries where it's hard to quantify how good somebody is without college, such as sales, something like that, the people who are going to be hired are just going to be the
okay. I think that was the worst example, because in sales, I just don't think you need a college degree to be good at selling things. But I also, I just think that wasn't a great example. And I think in most instances, you can just test for technical skills outside of college. And you'll note that even in America, lawyers don't have to have a college degree, because they can just do other things in order to gain that knowledge. And so I think in most industries, you can quantify, you can quantify without a degree. And anyway, and so we just think that this actually provides a metric, a way, an incentive for colleges to improve the quality of services and the quality of education they provide to their students. And we would note that maybe on offside, by their weighing metric, more people have college degrees, but we'd note that there's lots of people who are unemployed right now that have college degrees, because that college degree was useless, was not high quality, and did not actually help their outcomes in education. And so what we actually provide on our side is we provide, one, that avenue for people to get a really good understanding of an issue and still get employment. And secondly, we just improve the colleges themselves. So if anyone is we improve the colleges themselves and we make the degrees more valuable. So this actually ends up improving the outcomes for people who actually have a college degree, unlike theirs, which is an incredibly inefficient system. Never been prouder to propose. Vote CG.
Great. We thank the member of government for their very fine speech. Call upon the member of opposition to open the case for closing opposition. Same question on recording as previously.
Yeah, recording's all right. I want to start by addressing the CG case, where they tell you that this policy gives universities an incentive to get better. I want to directly flip this in my first extension, explaining why this means universities get less funding and overall get worse. To start, a bit of framing. I first want to point out that university access is improving, as some other teams in this round have agreed to. Admissions are becoming more progressive and trying to admit more students from minority and low-income backgrounds. I think schools in general are expanding, more community colleges are opening up, and existing colleges are opening up more spots. I also just think there's political and social pressure for more scholarship programs, government funding, etc. I want to note that all of this also naturally comes with an increase in the quality of education. Why is that? Simply competition. I think that as more students have more options in college, but also as scholarship programs increase, even low-income students oftentimes get scholarships to multiple schools so they can choose between them. I think that at the point where there's more competition between colleges broadly, I think that we are just going to get an increase in the quality of education. I think that already mitigates a lot of what MG brings to you. But why do we think this motion makes colleges substantially worse? I think the first thing to note is that it just means that university is valued less per OG's own mechanization about the perspective shift in society, where a lot of people now no longer think that they need a university degree. They're less likely to care about universities. I think secondly, businesses are going to hire more people without degrees. That's literally the point of the motion. Crucially, these aren't the underrepresented groups OG talks about. I think they're a lot more likely to be wealthy kids with connections. OO hints at this. The last thing to note is that I think you're more likely to get kids dropping out of college partway through. Why is that? I think that they might go to college because they don't currently have a job offer that they're happy with, but under this policy, they're probably more likely to get a job offer midway through college, since the college isn't necessarily waiting for them to get a degree. They can just hire them as part of the quota for students without degrees. I think that the reason that's crucial is because this means that students are likely to get job offers like partway through college and just drop out, which means universities basically circumvent the policy to a certain extent. But I think these kids now aren't getting degrees, the colleges aren't getting these people through to graduation. Why is this relevant? I think that all of these mechanizations are actually reasons why universities themselves are likely to get less funding. This is because, firstly, a lot of government-based funding is based on things like enrollment numbers and graduation rates, which means that if fewer people are going to college in the first place and more of them are dropping out partway through, these colleges with the same admission processes are going to get less funding for the students that they're admitting. But secondly, I think that the students dropping out or just choosing not to go to college are more likely to be wealthy students because they're more likely to have the connections needed to get a job right out of high school. They likely went to better high schools. They're more likely to have family connections. They're also more likely to know and care about this policy and be trying to get these jobs partway through college. I think that for this reason, this means you have students who are paying full tuition dropping out or not going to college at all, which is crucial because a lot of times colleges rely on the students who are paying full tuition, like private colleges especially, in order to be able to subsidize scholarships for other students. So all of this is to say that I think public universities are likely to get less government funding at the point where this policy exists. I think private universities are also likely to get less money because fewer wealthy students go and many of them drop out. The reason this argument is so important is because I think that this funding is key to the quality of this education, which is CG's main point, but it's also key to the ability to provide scholarships and to have more progressive admission systems in the first place, because they need a surplus of funding in order to be able to take in students who aren't paying anything at all. The reason this is important is because I think all teams agree that a college degree has some level of value. Like, a college degree gives students a lot of skills that they need to go into the world. It makes them more employable in the future, even under this policy, etc. What this means is that when colleges have less funding and the quality gets worse, all students are impacted by this because they aren't getting the skills they need to go into career. But I think this especially impacts the most low-income students at the point where it decreases the ability of colleges to provide things like scholarships to those students. In many cases, education is the best path for these students because they need something like a scholarship in order to be able to learn these skills. If they're not going to college, they're likely to need to work a full-time job, and there's less likely than wealthy students to be able to do things like learn the skills that they need on their own, like OG says is so important, because I think they're more likely to be taking on one or two jobs and not have the free time to learn things like how to code when they're not going to college. I think that in many cases, college and the ability to have a fully paid for education is the best way to allow underprivileged students to get the skills that every team in the round agrees are so important. Before I move on, I'll take the OG point.
This is 70% of jobs. Even if rich kids drop out, it obviously affects more minorities and poor kids that otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity.
Yeah, so I think that in the status quo, right, there are jobs that don't require university degrees, but I also think that we are realizing that university degrees have a lot of value, both in terms of the career place, but also just in terms of external benefits. And I think that the crucial aspect here is that the expanding access to university is contingent on universities having the funding to provide things like scholarship and mentor programs for low-income and underprivileged students. They don't have that on your side of the house at the point where I've given a lot of mechanization as to why university funding just goes down because they don't have as many students, they don't have as high of a graduation rate, and they don't have as many wealthy students paying an excess of money that they can use to provide scholarship programs and mentorship programs and things like that. What all of this means is that I think university, which all teams in the round agree has a lot of potential to provide benefits to students, gets a lot worse for all of the students that teams care about on both sides of the round. I think that this is independently the most important argument in the round at the point where it impacts people's whole lives, but I also think that it outweighs OO on things like the functioning of businesses at the point where now even the people with college degrees are going to have worse college degrees, which means business efficiency goes down for everyone, even the people they're hiring with college degrees. But the last thing I want to note in my speech is that I also think that backlash to this policy is likely to negate a lot of the other government impacts. Firstly, I think there's likely to be a lot of backlash against individuals in society, because I think that right now there are some individuals who can who can beat the odds and get jobs without degrees because they've worked really hard, they've gained the experience in other ways, or they just don't really need a degree. I think that at the point where this policy exists, all of their successes are now attributed to this quota existing and not the fact that they were able to work really hard despite getting a university degree. I think that this gives to a large degree of individual harms against these people at the point where they now feel like their successes are diminished because everyone is saying it is just from a quota. But I also think that broadly this leads to backlash against companies because companies want to be able to hire whoever they want. They're likely being incredibly unhappy with this policy. What this means is it probably decreases political capital and increases lobbying against other things like policies that aim to promote gender equality or racial equality within businesses. I think that lobbying against these policies is really harmful because there are a lot of other policies that are likely to be able to do more good than this policy, which, as I've already explained, probably harms both people who go to university and people who don't go to university. Very proud to be on CO.
Great. We thank the member of opposition for their very fine speech. Call upon the government whip to conclude the gov bench as a whole. Hear, hear.
When the higher tertiary education system and universities are able to monopolize the job market so that the only barrier to entry to a job is just simply having a degree, that gives them a wealth of power in seeing how they, conduct their degrees, how they do their processes at universities, how they, teach their students. When the only necessary component is this requirement, that means universities have a lot of ability to have individual cuts, to have bigger class sizes, to have less professors, to reuse outdated materials, because at least they're getting an education. We uniquely provide to you how larger competition, how making sure that universities are not the only requirement, actually force universities in a position to actually compete for their students, as opposed to students just going to university because that's what they need to get a job. So firstly, I'm going to talk about CO's case, and I'm talking about OO's, and I'm going to talk about OG's. So what is CO's case? Their entire point hinges on the idea that the quality of university decreases if you have a large amount of non-university students or non-degree holders being able to get into jobs. However, this whole thing was completely unproven and under-mechanized. They said that colleges are valued worse so that there's a perspective shift. This is untrue, because there are still going to be, as per OG's framing, certain jobs that still require specializations from universities, including CEO positions. There is also just still a cultural narrative about how the importance of education. So there's still likely going to be people that want to go to university, who want to specialize, who want to have that role. But now it's not necessary. Now it's not the only critical thing that they have to look at, which means universities now have to pander to their student base in order to actually get students to come in order to actually get funding. This means that they're likely to do certain things. Firstly, they're likely to increase the quality of the services that they're providing. If they are having bad quality services and their services are no longer needed to enter the job market, students are simply just not going to go to those universities. The idea is simply that they push that just the amount, the saturation university in the market leads to better quality, is simply untrue. Just because there's a lot of universities does not necessarily mean that those universities are good because of competition. Firstly, there are still monetary and locational constraints that force people to go to their geographically located university or the university that will apply to them, which means that there isn't actually sufficient competition right now to increase the quality of university services, or to decrease for them to actually pander to their student base. They also said that students that there's going to be lower funding, and there's going to be fewer people that get scholarships. The amount of people that get scholarships in the modern day world is very limited anyway. The amount of funding that people get is proportional to student amount anyway. So there's going to be less students going in, then you can have less funding without, I guess, like sacrificing quality and without sacrificing profit margins. It's all about servicing the people that you now get to service without having a monopoly on the job market. So also, CO's case hinged on like public university access as well. I'd just like to note that wealthy people tend not to go to public universities. This is still going to be so there's not going to have that funding there anyway. Wealthy people are still probably going to go to like private universities. And overall, if they need more students, if they need this to get better funding, they're going to have higher quality, they're going to offer more scholarships, they're going to have slightly cheaper access to get that student base that they need. The last thing that they said is just that there's going to be a high amount of backlash for individuals. Firstly, we just think this is unlikely because we don't understand how success is diminished when people want a university degree, but also they want to get into the job market. And they would rather like balance that out in the current modern day world where they think that having to go and get a university degree is fairly unfair. Okay, secondly to OO. They tell us that education is still valued because this provides checking mechanisms and information. My member proves this is not true, that the mechanisms that are provided by university and their worsening quality actually is not a very good metric for recruiters to use. They also said that there is more equity and meritocracy in a university system, but this is fairly symmetrical in terms of like uni recruitment processes versus like job recruitment processes. We'd also like to show that we proved that the technical skills that you can assess in an interview is like exclusive away from university, I guess, recruitment processes, which means you can like identify and examine for technical skills without necessarily requiring a university degree. This means that it is probably likely that work recruitment process can still be meritocratic, that they can still analyze people based on their skill set as opposed to just simply whether they hold a degree. They also said that the higher posting will still prefer the rich. I think this is symmetrical in either way. The rich get richer, at least in our world, that it is still meritocratic. At least we still get better university degrees. At least the poor people that get into university degrees will have high quality university degrees. They also just asserted that like companies are more likely to fire educated poor people, when this is quite unintuitive. If you have someone in your marketing team or like in your team that is efficient, that is a good worker, that is educated, that you've obviously hired for a reason, unlikely going to fire them based simply on social economic status. They also stated that this was going to lead to worse companies, worse economy, leading to much more firing because of inefficiencies. I'd like to just point out that because I'd like to take a POI just firstly for Marilyn.
All right, so the metric, even if it might be flawed, is better than the comparative, where we prove to you that recruiters are more likely to turn to nepotism, which hasn't been refuted yet. Given that colleges in both worlds probably still compete with each other to maximize their enrollment. That's how they get money.
The problem with nepotism is that nepotism is pretty symmetric on either side. People already use nepotism to get into connections with jobs. They already use nepotism for university degrees anyway. The thing that we prove is that either way, poor people are now likely to either get better education if they get into tertiary degrees because of the higher quality, or they're able to be more like balanced in a meritocratic sense when they get into the job market. The last thing I just want to point out is just they said that there's going to be like a worse economy, worse companies. Unlikely this is going to happen because now they're going to be basing it on efficiency. They're going to be looking at who's going to be their better worker in terms of actual skill set, as opposed to simply looking at just who has a degree, regardless of how good that degree is. So lastly, on OG just talked mainly about how there is an access privilege, that this legitimizes other forms of study, and that this changes social narratives. We prove why that this will lead to a higher quality of education, regardless of whether it's self-study or university, which is kind of the necessary proving to actually show why they're actually going to get better outcomes in job market and in job interviews. We also show that the quality of education increases on all sides, so this benefits all actors. It makes everyone more hireable, and it just results in better efficiency across the board.
Great. We thank the government whip for their very fine speech and thank the entire government bench. We now turn to the opposition whip to conclude both the opposition bench and this wonderful debate as a whole. Hear, hear.
Am I audible?
Yep, you are.
Cool. Okay, cool. I prefer my POIs in the chat, please. I think the main issue with opening half in today's debate is that arbitrariness is not mutually exclusive on either side of the house. In order to win this debate, you have to prove whether or not the enactment of said policy would decrease or increase the meritocratic abilities of people who do not benefit from nepotism to access these jobs, but more importantly, to stay within these jobs for them to actually have access to the impacts of a stable income to begin with. I will do that in this speech. Couple of issues right off the bat. The first issue I think that takes out GovBench is that unemployment becomes a lot scarier when you do not have the fallback of a college degree. That's to say, their impacts only exist in a world that their income is consistent over time. However, the positions in which these people are probably going to take are probably those that are adjudicated based off of the number of output that you can do relative to your coworkers. That's to say, if you did not have access to like having years of studying the equipment necessary for you to like create like vaccines or medical infrastructure or code, etc., if you did not have access to university peer review as well as the ability to spend your entire time for 4 years researching in depth on a specialized topic, you are at a comparative disadvantage towards those coworkers who might have a college degree. And you're far more likely to get fired because college degrees give you a safety net. And I just want to note that, by the way, like these companies do not have a good adjudication mechanism for them, because at the end of the day, they don't know whether or not the person that you hired is going to be as productive as someone without a college degree. So it's far more likely for you to not have a very, very long-term income. And when you get fired, we say when you don't have a college degree, not at this moment, you're far more unstable because first, with a college degree, you get skills that are cross-transferable across industries, i.e. coding is good for medical industries, consulting, finance, etc. But second, you probably have less access to stuff like unemployment insurance, etc. The second thing I want to talk about, and this deals with CG claim that, listen, you can still adjudicate people based off technical skills, like if you're just really good at R or not. This is uncomparative because you still have to provide a portfolio towards these employers for work. So people who drop out of colleges but still have the comparative advantages because they've had teachers give them feedback on their code, they've had peer reviews with people who might be smarter than them at coding, they might have access to resources like class files. So that's to say, people who are more privileged but decide to drop out are still going to have a comparative advantage over you because of their experience in colleges prior to dropout. The only way CG refutes us is by saying, people will still want to go to universities because of cultural narratives. First, not true. Usually lower income individuals go to community colleges where they get like away with like not paying that much debt because of the higher increase in your income. But now if you're far more likely to get that job without like actually having to go through community college, you make that trade-off decision and you choose to not go. Secondly, I think that this is actually truer for like richer people, right? Like these are people who are like, the degree doesn't matter. I just want to go because I want to like be in my dad's frat and have the same experiences as them, right? These are the people who are far more likely to drop out and decrease the number of like funding from the state when the state sees that you don't have that higher level of retention within your students, right? I want to weigh our extension in to opening half because I think opening half focuses a lot of this debate about access to jobs as well as whether or not the decision should be quantitative or qualitative. Our extension was quite simple. Colleges currently have access to funding and donations from private individuals because there is value in a degree. I think OO tries to inflate the arbitrariness because like in order for you to actually get these jobs, the college degree is in most cases just a threshold, right? We think that companies have the incentive to get that specialized workers to begin with. They're much more likely to fund people to go to schools in order to satisfy the specialized positions that they need. Before I continue, I'll take on a POI. I'll take a POI. Opening.
I don't understand why rich kids don't want the CEO position and drop out to get the bottom position. I explained why this forces competition with universities, which makes it much more accessible overall.
That's not our argument. It's like if a rich person drops out in their third year, they're probably going to get a higher level executive position because they still have the experiences of having like 3 years in colleges where they had access to like specialized skills and labor, stuff like that, right? All right, before I continue on, I'm going to deal with CG and their extension. I have 4 responses to this. First, their argument is contingent on our mechanism. So for students to have more leverage over universities, that means that students are not going to going to university or dropping out partway. Secondly, crucially though, this isn't unique to improving quality, since competitions with other universities also achieves the same mechanisms. Students can pick a different university or transfer midway, so universities need to appeal to more students. Third, I think our mechanization is unique to our argument, because when more students are choosing not to go to university or drop out, then you get less funding for scholarship programs, etc., and FAFSA. Fourth, they say that funding remains proportional to the number of students, which isn't true, because A, it's also influenced by graduation and dropout rates, but also B, wealthy students often pay more tuition and donate more, and C, money at scale is far more useful, i.e. a new lab costs the same amount even if the enrollment drops 10%. I want to deal a lot with why our extension now increases and takes us above OO, because I think a lot of the issues with OO is that they don't actually prove to you why meritocracy increases in their world. And I think that our extension is logically prior to theirs for 2 reasons. First, I think FAFSA and NGO sponsorships are dependent on whether or not the government thinks it's a worthwhile investment. That's to say, when a college degree overall is less important, you're probably going to be less incentivized to spend funding into these programs to begin with. And also, by the way, their mechanism on community colleges links also decrease, because community college enrollment numbers are also going to decrease because of the incentive analysis I gave to you on lower income students being less likely to make that trade-off, because they're far more likely to get a job not going to that university to begin with. And I think secondly, OO's claim falls into the trap of just running a negative case, and is susceptible to CG's claim of not being comparative because arbitrariness exists on either side of the house. In order to state that this policy leads to arbitrariness, you need to prove why without this policy, meritocracy is going to increase on a more comparative level. On our side, on closing opposition, we're the only side that gives you that comparative analysis, because without this policy prescription, what happens is you get far more likely funding from the state to increase scholarships. You get far more likely for the state to increase stuff like outreach programs towards minority communities to get access to that to begin with. At the end of the day, I think government bench fails to prove to you why these individuals, even in their best case scenarios when they get the job, are able to have longevity and long-term success, and why turnover overall is not going to increase at a rapid rate. For those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. CEO.
Great. We thank the opposition whip for their very fine speech, and I thank all speakers for an excellent round of debate. Everyone can now please leave the breakout room and head back to the main session. This is an open run, so we will be back with OA feedback and all of that. And if we can also pause the recording, that would be delightful.
Oh wait, this is open?
Yes, it is.
All right, word, thanks.
Thanks.
Hello, Belle. Is it possible to turn the recording off now?
Yes, we'll do that right now.